Thank you very much. And it's very good, actually, to see so many people that believe in the British fishing industry that will come out on a wet night and run the gauntlet of the head cases outside. So you're all racist if you like fish. So the only word, really, that comes to mind that I believe sums up the treatment of the British fishing industry over the last 40 years is betrayal. Betrayal. Starting with Edward Heath's sellout of the British fishing industry in 1971 up to the present day. Coastal communities and fishermen have been involved in a struggle. From ever tightening quarters and the introduction of more and more red tape, to the rape of our waters by EU vessels, the domination of flagships, and the concentration of FQAs in the hands of the wealthy few. The once mighty British fishing industry has been kicked around, lied to, and used as a political football for too many years. Politicians have conveniently ignored how fishing communities have seen their jobs stripped away by EU policy, how their standards of living have declined, and how vessels from across Europe continue to strip the seas of Britain's resources while local boats are tied up through a lack of quota. But fishermen are tough people, brave survivors in every aspect. And the communities, such as here in Lowestoft, continue to stand tall in the face of the constant promises that come from Westminster and Brussels. And it seems promises are all the government and the EU have to offer fishing communities at the moment. Last week, in a blaze of headlines, the supposed arch-Brexiteer Michael Gove MP launched his latest effort to convince fishing communities that they could trust the government not to sell them out. Introducing a bill to Parliament, the Environment Secretary claimed the UK could reclaim its waters from EU control, limit the number of EU vessels coming into British waters, and allow British lawmakers to adapt and repeal post-Brexit the disastrous common fisheries policy and rules that should never, ever have become UK law in the first place. So all well and good, you may think, except for one little thing. The qualification that all the measures outlined in the bill are subject to the wider EU negotiations. In other words, all the promises made in Gove's bill are little more than sound bites and spin. And while the Machiavellian Gove continues sending press releases and talking of reclaiming our waters, he's at the same time acting as May's lapdog in agreeing to honour the 2019 quotas decided at this year's December council meeting. Deal or no deal? Now, does that sound like taking back control to you? If it wasn't clear to you before, it surely must be now. Hoping the small band of the Tory Brexiteers was entirely misplaced. Now, just look at yesterday, the £12 million announced for fisheries in the budget. How is this paltry sum realistically going to make a difference in the fishing industry? And I'm sure you will have also noticed how very quiet Gove and the rest of DEFRA have been on the issue of electro-pulse fishing. Despite this disgusting practice being the biggest threat to the continuation of East Coast fishing for generations, it was left to local campaigners such as Paul and June to lead the fight to have pulse fishing banned, something that supposedly happened in January this year. However, in total betrayal of the only democratically elected body in the EU structure, the European Commission has now proposed electro-pulse fishing should go on until at least January 2022. So why 2022, you may ask? The answer is simple, and I will quote from the trilogue's proposal. And I quote, "The Commission shall request in due time an advice from ICES on the impact of electro-pulse fishing on marine ecosystems, including sensitive habitats or non-target species, and shall present an assessment report on the basis of this scientific advice by July 2020. In case of a positive assessment, the Commission may submit a legislative proposal on the use of this fishing method in accordance with the treaty. In other words, electro pulse fishing will continue now and into the future. Forget the growing evidence of the damage the practice does to the seabed and the ecosystems. Forget the fact that the MEPs voted to outlaw electro pulse fishing. The EU could not care less for democracy or the will of the people. The whole bloc is organised on the concept of maximising profit for the few. And something as silly as MEPs voting to ban a practice the EU has invested in can be stitched up, re-voted on, or just simply ignored. This is the reality of the EU's understanding of democracy. Simple fact is, having sat week after week in the European Parliament's Fisheries Committee, I can tell you that the EU has made it abundantly clear they have no intention of releasing their grip on Britain's fishing resources. And I can also say 100% confidence that the view of the European Parliament's PESH Committee has not changed one iota throughout the last 2 years, and the EU 27 fully expect continued access to British waters post-Brexit. If anything, the EU looking forward to strengthening its grip on our waters once British MEPs leave the Parliament and civil servants who can be ridden roughshod over and have one eye on their pensions are to represent UK fishing interests. And don't believe for 1 second that Gove is stupid and does not realise any of this. As stupid, he is not. Gove knows that a 3-year implementation period that involves not only following the EU's current rules, but also any new laws they can cook up, will see many small-scale fishermen quit the industry or go to the wall. Following 3 years of an implementation period, many of those in the fishing industry who oppose the CFP and EU domination of our waters will no longer have a vested interest. Too many broken by their experiences to care what comes next. In turn, this will follow the government of the day to use the implementation period as a stepping stone for our future relationship with the EU, as set out in July's white paper. Now, it's all very well Gove repeating time and again, we will control our waters and that we will leave the CFP. But taking those powers, adopting all the EU's rules and structures, and opening our seas to equal access is nothing less than a second betrayal of the fishing industry by a Conservative government. For me, Gove's recent fisheries bill, together with July's white paper, is nothing more than an attempt to mask how the establishment intends to maintain the status quo, keep equal access and continue the principle of British fish as a common EU resource. Simple fact is, after 40 years of betrayal, one of Britain's oldest and most challenging industry deserves the opportunity to flourish once more. But that does not mean we can divide up and retain fishing opportunities and carry on with the inept and lacklustre leadership of the industry that we've seen in the past. Things have to change. And I think it goes without saying that survival for many small-scale fishermen hinges on leaving the common fisheries policy in full, establishing our 200-mile exclusive economic zone, severely restricting, if not banning, EU vessels in British waters, and reclaiming the 70% of fishing opportunities in UK waters taken by EU vessels. Something must also be done to tackle the domination of the industry by a few companies and individuals. Currently, 97% of fishing opportunities are owned by a mere 11% of the fleet, while a small-scale fishermen who never receive quota allocation go begging. Any fool can see that an industry dominated by a select few, is neither productive for coastal communities, environmentally friendly, or sustainable in the long term. Simple fact is, after Brexit, the British government, no matter the colour, should be using a bespoke, tailor-made system that suits our mixed fisheries and prioritises all British fishermen. So what would I do? Well, in developing UK's recently announced fisheries policy, I use the principle of fairness and equality, something that has been missing from this industry for so long. As a national asset, the fishing industry should benefit the nation, be used as a catalyst to rejuvenate our coastal communities, maintain and create jobs, and rebuild ancillary industries, and benefit both the consumer and Her Majesty's Treasury. However, it's equally as important how we manage our waters and stocks once we get them back. Currently, the EU allows the UK about 30% of all fishing opportunities within our waters, meaning the UK will have thousands of tonnes worth of fishing opportunities returned to our shores if Brexit is correctly managed. For me, it would be a national disaster if this return quota was swallowed up by a few big companies and individuals, while small-scale fishermen saw none of the benefits. Therefore, I propose that all fishing opportunities returned from the EU should become a national asset, rather than lost to a privatised monopoly. These fishing opportunities should be held in a national pool, be equitably distributed, and the social and economic benefits returned to coastal communities. As a part of this new direction, I would also seek to end the sale of quota as a profit-making commodity and put in place a system that not only works for fishing industry, but also the communities from which it operates. Given the chance, I would also make flagships a thing of the past. This can be done by strengthening the economic link in the Merchant Shipping Act to ensure that British flagged vessels using British fishing opportunities contribute to Britain. While this has been tried before in what became known as the factor term case, in the UK free of the EU, we will not have to contend with the European Court of Justice declaring any moves to protect our fishing industry illegal. Therefore, we could demand that fish caught within the UK's EEZ, including those fished by any foreign flagged vessels operating under licence, are landed and sold in the UK. Not only would this move help to attract investment and development, it would also directly support struggling fishing communities. And by linking this with a civil shipbuilding programme for the growing fishing industry, in line with the WTO trade-related technical assistance programmes, we could provide a whole new range of skills, employment opportunities in economically depressed coastal areas. I would also like to see the elimination of discards from UK fisheries. Many fishermen have told me how they would rather give fish to charity than throw it dead over the side or into a skip ready for landfill. So let's do that for the benefit of all through using a bespoke landing system that would see fish caught outside of quota sold at market value, with the profits being used to fund fisheries science and management. I would like to see a fisheries bill that is not hot air, intended on keeping the status quo. A bill put together not just by politicians, but by all stakeholders in the industry. A bill that sets out in law how, where and when fish may be caught and the systems to be employed in ensuring Britain's fish stocks remain healthy, sustainable and profitable. However, a revitalised fishing industry and the creation of an EEZ will also need protecting, an area shown lacking during the recent scallop wars. Therefore, I'd like to see the creation of a new dedicated coastal protection force that will use a mixture of sea and land-based technologies to make sure rules are abided by, both nationally and internationally. All in all, British fishing industry must be made to work for Britain. The fishing industry is potentially worth a minimum of £6.3 billion to our national economy. Much more with vision, energy and investment. And could act as much needed shot in the arm to many struggling communities across the country. So Great Britain's exit from the European Union will be our time and our opportunity to right some of the wrongs of the past and get Britain's fishermen once again fishing in British waters. Thank you.